Hey guys, so this is just another continuation maybe to best practices. This chapter definitely covers more on the mistakes that at least I have made or probably I have seen people making. We have talked about these in individual lectures, but I just wanted to make sure I have a combined video so that we understand what are definitely the mistakes that you will come across or you should avoid doing. So without wasting any time, in this lecture we will not be doing a lot of coding. I've already written a lot of code and I'll be explaining you the code and talking about it. So pay attention because it's extremely needed. So the first one is accidentally using assignment operator. So if you remember all the conditional statements wherever we used an if, we always use a double equals. So first of all, make sure you're using a double equal sign to do any kind of a comparison. Now comes the real problem. So let's say if in this statement where x is equal to 0 and x equals to double equal to 10 is what you're checking for, and you try to do a console log or you want to put in anything you want to, in this scenario the answer will be false because 0 is definitely not equal to 10 and this console log will never get executed. But what if instead of double equals you give in a single equal sign? In this scenario the statement will become true. The reason is you're doing an assignment where you're saying x will become 10. So your x is actually having a value of 10, and if you remember the chart where if you have a number and you do a conditional of a number, this statement becomes a true, which you don't want to happen because x is 0, and if you do x equals to 10, it will actually print in this console.log. So assignment operator, and when using a comparison operator, make sure you use the right operator. Let's see the other problem. Let's see now when we have x equals to 0 instead of x is double equal to 0. When you're trying to compare x is 0, it is actually a 0 or no. In this scenario, for your surprise, this will be a false, and the reason for this to be false is this will become a number 0, and if this becomes a number of 0, and if you do a conditional check of 0, 0 is a false and not a true, and that's why this becomes a false. So this statement will never get executed. So it's very important that when you use a comparison, make sure you're using the comparison operator. Now the next one we have already seen plenty of times. It is expecting loose comparisons. We have talked about this where you're doing x is equal to y when x is 10 and x is string. This should work. But when you do a type comparison too, it fails. Make sure you stick with the practice where you use triple equals. So that way you know that you don't have to ever compare a particular object with another if you do not have to, but be cognizant when you use one of the two. We also have another problem in switch statement. So when you write a switch statement where you have a case of 10, it will alert hello. Now there is a problem here because 10 works, but the moment you do a 10 in quotes, which means a string, it will not work because switch statements are case sensitive. So your cases have to be the correct case. If you're giving a number, make sure the case is a number. If you're giving a string, make sure it is a string and it's not a number. The other one we have is confusion between addition and concatenation. I have dealt with it myself a lot, and that's why we wanted to talk about it. So the first thing is addition is for adding numbers. Let's make sure that we understand this. Addition is for adding numbers and concatenation is for adding strings together. But they both use the same operator, which is the plus sign. So if you recollect our examples where we had 10 plus 5 is 15, but 10 plus 5 as a string is 105 because it adds a string to it. So make sure you understand when you're using string variables or you're using actual variables. So if these were in variables, let's say a and b, in that scenario you won't even know what the values are, if it's string or no, but JavaScript will internally convert this and this will cause a problem to you. The other example that we saw when we were doing the floats section or floats video was the behavior of float objects. Now the problem is variable x is 0.1, y is 0.2, and if you remember the example, this you were expecting to be 0.3, but it did not turn out to be 0.3. And we added this logic in place for floating numbers, which was x into 10, y into 10, and then divided by 10. I mean, it made no justice to what we were doing, but it just made it 30 divided by 10, or rather 3 divided by 10, and you got the answer 0.3. So be careful when you're using floating point numbers. So you always need to make sure that you're doing the right addition, subtraction or multiplication with floating numbers. Now the other example was breaking a JavaScript string. So you can definitely break a JavaScript string here. It will work. But what if you break the JavaScript string here? It will not work. You see the color change. The reason is the way you can break it is either you can give a backslash, so that way you can break the string, or you can close the string, add an addition, and then again add the quotes here. So you make sure when you break a string in multiple lines, you know what you're doing. The other example is misplacing semicolon. It has happened to a fellow developer of mine. So I just wanted to make sure that you understand. The moment you do any if and a colon, this statement is over. This block is over. And that is why, as a best practice, we mentioned that always put your quotes on the first line. Because then you know that if there is a block along with the condition, you will know what to do. The next we have is breaking a return statement. So what happens when you break a return statement? So when you do not put a, let's say semicolon, and you try to execute this, it will work because JavaScript will internally make this a semicolon. What if you do variable power, variable on one line and power 10 on the other? In this scenario also, JavaScript will combine it to become variable power equals 10. However, this case does not apply to JavaScript when it has a return statement. The reason is the moment you do this, JavaScript interprets this return with a return semicolon, and that's why this particular logic will never be reached, and the answer for this function output will be an undefined because it doesn't return anything, and that's why it's an undefined. So make sure you understand that. The next we have is accessing the arrays with name index. We've already talked about the associative arrays, which is there in multiple languages where you have, you can actually address the position or the array element with the name. It does not apply in JavaScript. For JavaScript, it's always an indexed number index, which means array of 0 should give you the value that you're looking for. So be cognizant when you're using arrays that you do not have names. You only have numbers, and everything number has to start with a 0. The other common problem I've seen is ending the error definition with a comma. So make sure you don't have a comma at the end. That will not work because JavaScript will then expect a value after this and it will cry for it. Similarly, when you're defining an object, make sure you do not have a comma at the end. We need to understand the difference between undefined and null. In this example, my object not equal to null and type of my object is not equal to null is the condition that we are checking. But this will break. The reason being, my object will first be of type undefined because it's not defined. And if you're checking for null, it will break itself and this condition will never be checked. So make sure your conditions are in this order. Okay. Now, expecting block level scope. So if you're expecting that variable I in this code, you execute something and you try to return I, this will actually return a 10. So this will return a value of 10. And the reason for that is JavaScript does not create a new scope for each code block. It is true that many programming languages, but not JavaScript. It is a common mistake among JavaScript developers to believe that this code returns undefined, but this code will actually return a 10. So these are some of the common mistakes that I have seen in day-to-day practice. I just wanted to pass it on to you so that you understand not to make these mistakes. I'll see you in the next class.